What's up? It's me, your girl Brianca Jay, and I want to thank you guys for coming to my little corner of the internet where we discuss all things books, literature, reviews, analysis, summaries, just literally the answer to that quiz question you can't get by. I am here to answer it all, and I want you to stay tuned. So make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to get more videos like this. Now today we're talking about Charlotte Gilman's Perkins, the Yellow Wallpaper. And to go through this one, we're going to get a deep dive or a close reading of different elements of the work. So grab you some tea, grab you some comfort, and get ready to understand this work better than you ever have before. Okay, so this is Charlotte Gilman Perkins' work, The Yellow Wallpaper. And I personally think this is a really good story because it is like a woman's freedom story, like how she attains freedom, right? It also has like these elements of Gothicism, and also is one of the first short stories where a woman actually penned it under her own name. So I simply appreciate it for its feminist contribution to literature. So what we're going to do today is going through like a discussion about the form and the content and the context of the story throughout the passages, right? So in section 1, for instance, it says, "It is very seldom that a mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer, a colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate." So, how will we describe the story's setting, and how and why is the setting important? So again, it brings up those Gothic elements of the haunted house, meaning the setting of this story is a part of the driving conflict. So understanding that it's like this huge mansion set off away from neighbors, it looks nearly haunted, right? It gives us this idea early on that the house is going to be a major element of the story. And that is exactly a part of Gothicism literature. The setting is inserted into the conflict. In section 1, it goes on and say, "John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster." So, how would we describe the narrator here? What is the narrator's style of writing, and what is her tone? How will we describe the husband? So we describe the husband as someone who is very reasonable, analytical, a physician, so very decisive and successful, right? But she can't speak freely around him, so maybe even a bit controlling. And then her style of writing or her tone is that she has to be hushed, quiet, moving in secret, right? She's not really getting an opportunity to really express herself, but desires to. And we see that throughout like her rush manner of her sequences when she kind of catalogs her entries into this like diary or journal. Next, it says, "Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good." What does the narrator believe would be the best cure for her? How does this contrast with what her husband and brother say? And so for that, again, she wants to go out. She wants to be with her friends. She wants to, have fun. But they instead tell her to be rested, to not do too much, not to have too much action, to not write, to just kind of do nothing. Just do nothing is kind of what she is told to do. And she thinks this is really the opposite of what she needs. It goes on to say, "There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to see me write a word." So the narrative style of this story. What is the effect of the journal style in developing the main character? By operating in this journal style work, we get to know that we are getting deep inside the inner psyche of our narrator. So she doesn't have to lie about how she feels. We can truly trust her. But we also get these broken and unfinished arguments and ideas because she's ultimately sneaking every time she pulls out her journal. So how does this influence the reader and understand the main character? We trust her, but we almost feel like this free Britney, leave Britney alone. That's how we kind of feel about the narrator, right? We want her to attain her freedom and we want to believe her, but some of the things she says is starting to look a little peculiar. She's looking at the house, she's like looking at the wallpaper, and as she goes on, we start to question her, like who's right and who's wrong, right? So by section 2, we think about the narrator's mental state and what's going on. So we know she's in the room, and then Mary is hanging out with the baby, and it makes her nervous about the wallpaper, but she can't really tell John because he said it would be like if she changed the wallpaper, she would continue to ask more and more. And he's not here to renovate the house. And he doesn't want to really play into her thoughts because he thinks that if he plays into her thoughts, she's only going to get worse. So instead, he kind of takes her in his arms and coddles her. But he doesn't really listen to her, you know. He kind of treats her like she's a little silly. So mostly she kind of looks out the window and she kind of imagines kind of getting free, but he keeps telling her she has like a nervous weakness, and to kind of just check the tendency to kind of come up with these stories. So he's telling her that she's kind of making up stories in her head. And so as a reader, it's our job to consider that to be true. Like, is he right or is she right? You don't really know. The mental state of the narrator is in question, right? Because she's telling us she thinks something's going on with this wallpaper and it's making her uncomfortable, and it sounds really, really small. But considering everything, like she just had a child, so there could be a part of postpartum depression going on here. There's a lot at work, right? And so we have to consider all of these different extenuating circumstances around the narrator. And what we really understand is that we don't know the full story. But we just have her kind of digressing. And then so thinking of another essay called Godey on Motherhood in 1867, he says, about every true mother, there is a sanctity of martyrdom. And when she is no more in the body, her children see her with a ring of light around her head. And so that's what we consider like motherhood, right? Our children see us as saints. But what we notice here is that she is completely separated from the child. She is not around the child. Mary is kind of helping her with the child while she kind of coaxes herself back into reality or into feeling like herself. So we see a different form of motherhood from this particular narrator. Moving into section 3, we have it saying, and dear John gathered me up in his arm and carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed and sat by me and read to me till it tired my head. So what does it suggest about the reader and the narrator and her husband? This is something you would do to a young child, right? So he's treating her very childlike. And we can kind of characterize the narrator as seen as a fragile, unstable individual with a small, just a small child almost. That's at least how her husband treats her. And we have the husband, and looking from the narrator's point of view, we can consider him to be controlling and dismissive and even a bit coddling. But we do know for a fact that he is a doctor and he's working and he is attending to his wife and caring for her, and what we can only assume is the best nature possible. So we have this dual view of the narrator, whom the facts represent, and then whom we're told he is based on the narrator's particular ideology of him. So then it moved on to say, and it is like a woman stooping down and creeping out behind that pattern. I don't like it a bit. I wonder, I begin to think, I wish John would take me away from here. Now she's talking about the wallpaper again. So what is the significance of the woman behind the yellow wallpaper? For this, I believe that we're thinking about her own feeling of trappedness, and it's represented by her, like her delusion of this woman living in wallpaper. The woman she's thinking of is herself in this feeling of trapped, whether it be in marriage or motherhood or just in this home in entirety. That represents that. And then in section 4, we see the fact that I'm getting a little afraid of John. How would you describe the narrator's mental state in section 6? How has she changed? What is her tone at this point in the story? So we see her kind of go from, I'm telling John and he's not listening, to now she's kind of wary, like he knows what's going on here and she's suspicious of him, and she begins to like hold things back from him. She tried to talk to him so much, but been dismissed so many times that now she's kind of holding back her opinions of this man to this man, and she's not telling him like what's going on in her thought process, because she's afraid that if she does, he's gonna commit her to like an asylum. So her narration begins to change. You see her get a lot more suspicious, a lot more paranoid in the writing as she furthers on. And then by section 10, it says, "What is the matter?" he cried. "For God's sake, what are you doing?" And she says, "I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. I've got out at last," said I, "in spite of you and Jane, and I pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back now. Why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time." So she says, "I got out at last." So she's talking about getting out of her own head and also getting out of the paper on the wall. And then it says, "What is the ending of the story suggest about the woman behind the wallpaper?" I would say that there was never any woman behind the wallpaper, that she was literally losing her shit. And she kind of ripped off the wallpaper in like a symbolic fashion of like ripping off the bars or the of decorum that kind of was holding her hostage. Yeah. So the story is deep, to say the least. I personally enjoyed reading it. It really said a lot about women's rights at that time. But again, like I enjoyed just about every part of it. What else can I tell you guys before I let you go? So a little bit about the background of the story is Charlotte Perkins Gilman was a part of the women's suffrage movement. And she says, "For many years, I suffered from a severe and continuous nervous breakdown, tending to melancholia and beyond. During about the third year of this trouble, I went in devout faith in some faint stir of hope to a noted specialist in nervous diseases, the best known in the country. The wise man put me to bed and implied the rest cure, to which his still good physique responded so promptly that he concluded that there was nothing much in the matter with me, and sent me home with solemn advice to live as domestic life as possible, to have but 2 hours of intelligent life a day, and never to touch a pen, brush, or pencil again as long as I lived." So that was in 1887. By 1913, she actually responded to people's question of why she wrote the Yellow Wallpaper. And she says, "It was written during a time of great change. In the early to mid-19th century, domestic ideology positioned American middle-class women as the spiritual and moral leaders of their home. Such separate spheres, ideals suggested that a woman's place was in the private domain of the home, where she should carry out her prescribed roles of wife and mother. Men, on the other hand, would rule the public domain through work, politics, and economics. By the middle of the century, this way of thinking began to change as the seeds of early women's rights were planted. Specifically, over 300 early feminists such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton convened in Seneca Falls for the nation's first convention to discuss and promote women's rights and roles. By the end of the 1800s, feminists were gaining momentum in favor of change, and the concept of the new woman began to circulate in the 1890s through the 1910s. As women pushed for broader roles outside the home, roles that could draw on women's intelligence and non-domestic skills and talents. This push for change was not without backlash. Adherents of separate spheres ideology turned to popular media such as magazines, advertisements, advice literature, and political cartoons to retain the image of women as the queen of the home. So the story was written in the time of this great change. And then if I can leave you guys with one more lasting thought, let's see what it would be. That's it. That's it. That's my lasting thought is to comment, like, and subscribe to this video. If you want more like deep seated reading, we go section by section like we just did to understand stories, then let me know. If that's all, then I guess I'll catch up with you guys another day at another time. See you soon.